Good morning, folks. It's left and right again, and here it is, the 4th of July, Independence Day, as some people like to call it. And we're here with Mark Guerringue, who's sitting again in for Gino Funicella. Mark is a newspaper publisher, 4 newspapers, 3 in New Hampshire, 1 in Maine, and one of which carries my column most of the time. And here we are. So we're going to deal with whatever's on the table for the last couple of weeks. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you, and happy July 4th. I do have a trivia question.
Sure, go for it.
So we know, where is the original Declaration of Independence?
Where is it housed?
Located. Where is it located? The original. The first one was made on parchment. It was signed.
Well, the capital was Philadelphia, I think, at the time.
Let me give you a hint.
Yeah.
Okay, it's in Washington.
Yeah.
At the National Archives.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that would have been my first guess, but I thought it was maybe a hook question.
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
So there is no hook question, but how many, so I just looked this up, so I know you're the history guy, but Google makes adds like, what, 20 points to everybody's IQ?
Oh, it does?
I think so. In my case, it's probably more like 30, 40. So how many, this guy John Dunlap printed copies? They wrote the first one, signed it. How many did he print on July 5th? Guess.
200.
Good. That's exactly it. And then how many survive today?
A dozen or less.
26.
26.
Yeah.
All right.
And one was found about 15 years ago in Philadelphia in back of a picture frame at somebody's house, and that sold for $8 million.
Wow.
And a second one was found about 10 years ago in the British archives, and it had been in a box for a couple hundred years, and the British had taken it from some colonists, and there it was.
I thought I heard about one found in an attic in Maine about 15 years ago, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
I don't know.
It might not have been one of the original 200 copies, but an early one that somebody was cleaning it out. And, what's this? I wonder if it's worth anything.
Because once John Dunlap printed his 200, then it was reproduced in other print shops around the states, the colonies.
And that might have been where this came from. But that's probably why I remembered the 200 figure from an article on that. But go ahead.
Very good.
Get any others?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. All right, we're supposed to do this one right off, says station manager, producer. So let's go at it. With the new Supreme Court justice to be appointed to replace Anthony Kennedy, do you think there's a chance that Roe v. Wade will be overturned within the next 5 or 10 years? You want to start?
I don't think so. I mean, I think my 2 cents is that John Roberts would step in. He seems to be more less ideological about it, and he wouldn't want to overturn a precedent. That would be my guess. I think the Roe v. Wade will be chipped at. I think there'll be a lot of little cases, whether it's about advising young women or taking away clinics or whatever. Like Texas has some pretty strict laws. I'm not particularly versed on the abortion world and the pro-life, pro-choice, but my sense is not. About you?
Well, I have been pretty passionate about the issue for many years. I think it's bad law, personally, Roe v. Wade. I think it's even if I didn't have an axe to grind in the issue, it's just bad law. But I've contended it's the biggest issue in the Democrat Party, the single biggest issue. And the Supreme Court is the third branch of government, the highest level of the third branch, the judiciary. And the ones who now are speaking of it so passionately, like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, they call them moderate, I'll call them liberal, Republican senators, are saying that without Roe v. Wade, they couldn't vote for someone who they believe would not uphold Roe v. Wade and respect precedent, as they say. But then Okay, 1973 is when it passed by a 7-2 margin in a liberal court. And they say, well, okay, what do they call it? Settled law, and it should not be overturned. But then, if you look at something like Plessy versus Ferguson, which, separate but equal, 1892, I think, is when that passed, and then that was overturned in 1954 by Brown versus the Board of Education, a complete reversal.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is precedent for not respecting precedents, and
Sure.
about a half century of it and so forth. So that's a.
So I guess the question, though, is not whether it can be done, is whether it will be done. Like, do you think?
Well, that all depends on confirmation,
Right.
and and it only takes a simple majority. And I'd only repeat the speculation that's out there. Even if Murkowski and if
So would you
Collins,
support it? Would you support a overturn of Roe v. Wade?
I would. I think it should be overturned. I think it should go back to the states, not just because I think it kills babies, which is the human rights of a baby.
That's a theological definition, but that's
No, I don't agree with
I don't
that. It is theological, but it's also a secular definition on the part of some.
I don't agree that it kills babies. I mean, who kills babies?
Abortion kills
Really?
babies. Yes, it does.
10-week fetus is a baby?
Well, if it doesn't start if it's not a baby at 10 weeks, when are they a baby?
Well, I think when they're self-sustaining, and it's funny, and we can get in that debate, and the viewers, I'm sure, it's a very passionate thing. But I learned my mother was our war hero in my family, and she
Really?
was, yeah. And I say that a little facetiously, because my father wasn't; he was a little too young, and
She was in the military.
yeah, she was a nurse, and she was over in France, tromping around in the mud.
Wow.
After D-Day, and has some great photos of Paris and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But back then, before this was even a debate, or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, when this sort of came, I guess it was 73, she says, look, I've been a nurse, I've seen fetuses, there's no way that these things are babies. So that's been my core from the very beginning of how my belief is. And I do think, in all due respect, I don't think you can call, I know people who are pro-life call all fetuses babies, or when insemination is, or where life starts, but we do draw lines. And so I just think it's a little unfair to characterize. You may not believe it.
Where do you draw the line? When you said viability, so that would be about 24 weeks.
Yeah, I think there's viability, and I think this idea of third-term abortions and all that, it's such a red herring issue, because those are so rare. I mean, what mother wants to have an abortion, in that late? Usually it's extreme conditions. So. And the other part of that, and I'll just stop, is that it's not. I don't think it's your decision. I think it's a woman's decision.
Why does the man not have any say? Isn't it his child?
Well, it's not his body, though.
But you don't think it's his child?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that someone's got to be a final determination.
A woman doesn't say, I'm going to have a fetus. A woman always says, I'm going to have a baby. And if she's pregnant, she's already a mother.
So you're saying a man should be able to force women to carry a pregnancy?
No, I'm saying that a man should have some say in it. In that if through some casual sexual encounter a pregnancy results, and the woman decides, well, I don't want to have this child, then I want to have an abortion. He has no say. If he found out about it and said, well, I really wish you would not have this abortion, that's my child too, and I don't want you to do it, he has no legal say at all.
Right. You think he should?
However, if the woman chose to have the child, and let's say he wanted the abortion, and she wanted to go ahead and have the child, she could force him to support that child until its 18th birthday. Now, that doesn't add up.
Well,
If he has no responsibility for it, if he has no say in it, then why is he on the hook for it?
Well, to me, you're mixing you start off with the origin, when an egg is implanted, that's when life, or viable life, begins. So you're saying they're all babies from then on. So I think I would just argue it's not. It's up until whatever point of whatever it is, and Roe v. Wade makes that gives women choice. Women don't have the right to, or nobody has the right to a 3-month-old baby to kill a 3-month-old baby. Right? Nobody has the right to do that.
Peter Singer would say, who is a biologist and ethicist at, I think, Columbia University, would say that he advocates the killing of 3-month-old babies if they have certain handicaps, if mentally and emotionally they're not aware of being a human being or something like that. He believes in essentially euthanasia.
And I mean, so what about in a case of rape or incest? Are there any circumstances where you believe
If
that?
I believe that a human life begins at conception, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's a human life is a human life.
That's valid. All right. All righty. We're not going to solve this one.
Okay, we're not. But it's going to be a very interesting, I think, summer. There'll be a confirmation vote, says McConnell, in October. So that means the summer is going to be dominated by this. And, you know, Gorsuch, there wasn't much of a fight for Gorsuch. There was resentment that McConnell had not allowed hearings on Obama's nominee, whose name I forget, until the presidential election. But it didn't really amount to much. But then he was replacing a conservative justice, so they figured, okay, the balance isn't going to change. Now here you got Anthony Kennedy, who's called the swing vote on the court, and I think we're going to see tooth and nail. And then if somebody else were to die or retire or earlier, become disabled like Ruth Ginsburg or any of the liberal justices, then I think you're going to have a war.
Yeah, no, it's
because they'll say, okay, that's a.
And the Supreme Court has, I think, it's become more. It's just political body now. I mean, I think it's just the way it has evolved. You know, back in the Bork when the Democrats did it to Bork in the '80s, and I think with Garland, is his name Garland, the one that was?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that the
Merrick Garland.
So the fact that the Republicans really stalled that. For a year or whatever it was, really opens the door to politicizing it. And one of the things that I didn't know, and I'm sure you know this, is that the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily have to have 9 members. In history, it's been higher and been lower. So one of the Democrats' strategies can be, when they get the House back, or the presidency, or the Senate, they'll just increase the number. Because, and the Republicans have always been more interested in the Supreme Court than the Democrats. I mean, that's been the whole thing. The justification for voting for Trump is that, well, we don't like him so much, but we're going to get our Supreme Court. I personally believe, for me, and maybe because I'm on the liberal side of things, that for some reason it's not that important. It's hugely important, but I just think that society tilts left. Like as we move on in life, we get more and more progressive in a positive, a lower P, not a liberal, and so things happen. I mean, Ireland, right, didn't they have whatever it was, a referendum or a vote that legalized?
A referendum to abortion.
A referendum. So I think that just happens as we become more progressive as societies, those like rights for gays and gender equality and all that, we just become more enlightened and progressive. So regardless of what the Supreme Court does, the horse is out of the barn on all those social issues, in my view.
So do you like the idea of calling, you use the terms liberal and progressive interchangeably. So you wouldn't use the classical liberal definition of liberal. You would use the left of center definition of liberal.
Yeah, I was kind of teasing you. Progressive, one would say progressive is a positive adjective regardless of how you apply it. So I'm saying, conservatives aren't progressive. They want to, conservatives want to kind of keep things the way they are generally. And us progressives.
Well, conservatives, I think if I were to write progressive, and I believe I would put it in quotation marks because it's a relatively new term, and it's a euphemism for liberal, which has gotten negative connotations, because I think conservatives have exposed it as such, some of their incongruities, and now. Well, this debate now, Roe v. Wade, they say it's settled law and they want to preserve it. So is that preserving? That you said conservatives want to preserve things. Now I would say it's the left that wants to preserve things. And if they've gotten to gay, and I would put gay marriage in quotes as well. I know it's legal, in the whole country. It was going state by state before, but mostly what I object, I mean, I don't believe there is such a thing as homosexual marriage. And I notice I use the word homosexual and not gay because, again, to define the debate by introducing words that are euphemisms or that sound better or so forth is a tactic of the left. And they want to control your thoughts by controlling the terminology that's used that's acceptable. Can't say illegal alien anymore. The gay and lesbian advocates and defenders have a whole guidelines for media saying these terms are acceptable, these terms are not acceptable. If you use this term that we think is not acceptable anymore, then we're gonna give you a hard time, and they're capable of giving you a very hard time. So I resist that kind of what I think of as brainwashing by choosing to say I'm going to say homosexual. It's that's until it becomes illegal. And which I expect it will at some point, just like certain other pejorative words that were used are now hate crimes, and that will eventually happen if present trends continue. So those trends disturb me, and so I'd say now that it's the so-called progressives who want to preserve these hard-fought things, to use a phrase of Dianne Feinstein. I have a quote from her, which I'll end with. When she was talking to Amy Barrett, who may become the nominee next Monday, she was being considered for a lower court, an appeals court, I forget where, and Feinstein was interviewing her. And she's a Catholic. She taught at Notre Dame. She has 7 children, so probably doesn't believe in abortion. And Feinstein said about her Catholicism, but she couched it in vague terms. She said, "The dogma lives loudly within you, and that's of concern when you come to big issues that people have fought for years in this country." Now, what is she saying? You're a Catholic, a true believing Catholic. Therefore, you're not fit to be on the court because the way you live your life is antithetical to what most people believe in this country, which I wouldn't agree with, that statement, but that's what we're up against here.
Well, I mean, I can't debate that chapter and verse. I think the Supreme Court is highly politicized. We know that Trump is on the record saying he'd want a Supreme Court justice who's against pro-choice. So, I mean, that's not based on one's qualifications. That's based on one's philosophies and approaches to life. So.
What about the states versus federal government? I mean, if Roe V Wade were to be repealed or overruled, then it just goes back to the states the way it was prior to 1973. Abortion does not become illegal. It just becomes, decided by the people within each of the 50 states.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same. I mean, the states' rights argument is always, it's a slippery slope. And again, I'm not a constitutionalist and an expert on federal government, but that's always code words for, hey, civil rights. Let's not have the federal government get involved with civil rights. Let the states decide it. That was always the Southern strategy, the states' rights. So, it depends on what you think unites our country, what issues are environmental laws. Should we have environmental laws? Should any law be? Should we have any federal laws for that matter? So where do you draw the line? And I think it's just it's generally a conservative tactic to say it should be left to the states. It's easy to say that. Hey, leave it to the states. Leave it to the states. But we know that's it's going to be an erosion, and it'll be a mess. So are there some laws that should be federal? Should we have any federal laws? Maybe that's the...
Yes, we should, but only the ones the Constitution allows for. And the Constitution is very clear about what powers the federal government would have. And if you take the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Bill of Rights, which you don't hear about very much, they consent that any law not expressly granted within this Constitution to the federal government, nor denied to the states, shall rest with the states or with the people. And so the Constitution is a document that limits the federal government, and it limits government as such. It limits state government as well, and they all had to agree on it. And when Bill Marvel was sitting where you are, we discussed some of this, and he said that I don't think the Constitution would be ratified today. I don't think it would have a chance, but it was, and then he understood, what the document did, and it limited government. There were people who believed that government is best that governs least.
Yeah.
So to put it back to the states is the original intent, and
Yeah.
to limit federal power.
But the federal power, the federal power, it washes both ways. We've given the conservatives tend to want to give the federal government an incredible amount of federal power on the military side and security side and the Patriot Act and all that. Conservatives were very much in favor of that, and I think I remember the library card. That was one of the pushbacks like 10 years ago, where
On the Patriot Act.
On the Patriot Act. So I think it just depends on one's political perspective, and things evolve. But.
Well, the Constitution in Article 2 gives the federal the president, he's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and in Article 1 it gives Congress the power to declare war, and that the states may not have standing armies. They can have a national guard, but it has very limited use.
But even
so
that's
it's
been
very
corrupt.
clear about the Constitution.
But even that is corrupted. Our presidents have basically declared war for the last 40, 50 years.
Yes, that's a problem.
So, anyway.
Yeah.
All right, next.
All right, next issue. All right. Do you have something that you wanted to bring up?
Sure. I guess I wanted to ask you about, we know the shootings in Annapolis at the newspaper office.
Right.
And, so since being a newspaper guy, it was a big deal for us, although I think we all assumed it was, or just came to the conclusion that it was a kind of a one-off. This guy had it in for this particular newspaper.
Yeah.
As a little aside, our editor, Margaret McKenzie, worked with one of the guys who was killed when they both worked at the Palm Beach Post. So she had it in the world of degrees of closeness. There was a connection there. So, it leads to discussion. So it comes into the debate of how influential violent video games are. So do you think that that President Trump has said that the press is the enemy of the state? Do you think that had any role in this at all?
I didn't follow you when you brought up video games.
Well, I have to admit, I was jumping around there, but there's been an ongoing debate about whether video games with young, since most of the mass shooters, for instance, tend to be young, white, lonely guys, right?
Yeah.
So how much are they influenced by kind of the mass shootings that one can replicate on video games? I know for you and I was thinking, we all think about this. When I was a kid, and you were the same generation, is that we may fantasize about playing cowboys and Indians or a military, but I don't think I ever, in my mind, even knew what a mass shooting was, right? As a kid, it's just not something that there. And so kids today, all kids are brought up.
Non-military.
Brought up with video games and mass shootings. So I guess my question is that if you have
I do have an opinion about video games. I think that they would contribute to lessening
desensitizing.
Yes, that's a good word. Young males, especially, I think, in spite of what progressives say, there are profound biological differences between males and females, and males with testosterone tend to be more aggressive, and you're not less likely to see a female mass shooter, just because I think by nature they're not that way. But I think that it desensitizes young men who have an innate proclivity toward violence, that more so than women would, or young women. I think that's a factor. Was it a factor in this particular shooting? I'd have to kind of know this character. I'd want to see a psychological profile of this guy, which will probably be out soon. As for Trump's rhetoric about the press and being the enemy of the people, I would say no. I agree with the people on your staff who would say it was a one-off in that sense, contributing. But when you looked at a year ago, you had this guy, this Bernie supporter, who was shooting up congressional Republicans at that baseball game. The case was made by conservatives that he was stirred up by anti-Trump rhetoric, anti-Republican rhetoric in mass media, mainstream media, which is overwhelmingly progressive, or left-wing, or liberal, or whatever what have you. And so, yeah,
I don't think in the defense of the anti-Trump media, I'm not sure anybody suggested that he was an enemy. An enemy. I mean, this is the President of the United States who's saying that the press is literally the enemy of the state. So do you think, maybe I'll ask it this way, do you think we'll hear less criticism from President Trump?
Because he might think that it's too self-indulgent for him to, to say that. I mean, that was Steve Bannon's approach. I remember Bannon before he became pretty well known. I heard him speak at CPAC, and he was involved with Breitbart, and that he was very much against mass media. And Andrew Breitbart himself, who I also met and spoke to some before he died, was he started Breitbart.com, and then Bannon kind of took it up from him, but he took up that mantle that left-wing media is the biggest issue, the biggest problem. Left-wing Hollywood and media.
So when you say,
conglomerate.
Which leads me to ask, like, when you say left-wing media, like, what do you mean that the individual journalists are stacking their reporting against the Trump? I mean, there are 50,000, 50,000 journalists in this country, from Little Conway Daily Suns up to the New York Times. So how do you broad brush that? I mean, you think they're like the corporates and the towers are telling Anderson Cooper what to say, or do you think all media people are liberal and they have an agenda? How do you
mostly that? I would say that it's a cloister, that they come from. Well, you take the most elite journalism school, Columbia school, a graduate school. They're overwhelmingly leftist. They're overwhelmingly Democrat. The Washington press corps, those correspondents that get sent there by newspapers and TV stations that can afford to do so still, they are over 90% voting Democrat, and contributions to political parties are overwhelming, and this has been true for 25 years in all kinds of Pew surveys and so forth. That's the hard data. But also people, and they live and work together, and they're passionate. I mean, you look at how much they hate Donald Trump, and that's so widespread in mainstream media.
Do you think that it's when you say that though?
It's visceral.
Do you think that's when you say, well, 90% of the and I think people who are in media tend to be liberal. I mean, I think it's just a type of person. Like, some people join the Army, some people join the Peace Corps. But does it ever occur to you that it's very highly insulting to media when you just broad brush and say that they're that way? I mean, it's sort of like, maybe a good analogy would be the people who are policemen and anybody in the justice world. I mean, justice, whether it's FBI, any federal agent. My guess is that most people who are in the enforcement area of our law enforcement are conservative. And I think it's true. Mueller's conservative. I mean, Republicans, all those guys, the Justice Department. But I don't then think
I think Mueller's conservative.
He's a Republican.
Yes,
I mean, he's a Republican. I mean, they're all, I mean, without getting into the Mueller thing, I know you have something he did 20 years ago, whatever, but I mean, most people in the Justice Department, it's just a known thing. And the way that you say 80% of the people who are Democrats, although on our staff we have a couple conservatives who vote Republican, so I'm assuming that's the way it is for most places. So, but I'll accept that at 80% of the people or 90% of the people are Democrat who are in media. I'm also asking you to accept that, I don't know any percentage, but I bet you a majority of people in law enforcement are conservative. They vote Republican. And
that's probably true.
But I don't say that they.
The ones I know
are. Yeah. Okay, so that's true. But then, to me, what's the insulting part of your proposition is that I then don't think that police or people in the FBI are targeting liberals. They're personally conservative, but they're trained to be fair in how they administer law enforcement. And it's the same thing with journalists. Journalists. Nobody ever says in journalism, Columbia School, that you're going to be, this is how you get Trump or get the Republicans. They're trained to report in a balanced way.
Have you ever heard of this outfit from about 10 years ago It was called Journalist.
No.
Well, it was a reporter at the Washington Post, and I'm going to test my memory. Ezra Klein, I think his name was, and he had a list of other journalists in large media, mainstream media, television, and in newspapers, mainly the big city broadsheets, about how to spin a story. And he would, it was it wasn't, he didn't expect it ever to be discovered, but there were a couple of hundred people on this list, and they regularly convinced about how they were going to spin stories. Look it up, journalist,
okay, but
not
I mean, those are
journalist.
specific
That's one
anecdotes or
example that
stories,
came
but
to
I mean,
mind as you were speaking.
If you talk to people at the Boston Globe or the Portland Press Herald or any journalist, I mean, you have to appreciate how insulting that is when you say that they purposely do that. And it's like, it would be like, you're a teacher, right? I mean, you're obviously a retired teacher. I mean, it's sort of like what people say about teachers, those who can do, those who can't teach. You know, and is that, I mean, you know,
Well,
I mean, it's
I
a
know.
little insulting to say that, but people, you know, a lot of people kind of just believe that. And so I'm saying it's in the same category of when you insult journalists by saying, you're saying that they're,
Am I insulting them?
well, it's,
I think I'm just saying,
you're
I see it, I see black and white, and I'm saying there's black and white here. I think that the evidence is overwhelming.
the evidence, and this is
I'm
why.
not saying each individual journalist is biased.
Then how do you, if you're saying that Trump is, and I always say my counter to that is that journalists go after the most sensational headline story in general, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of
Bleeds
the
and
politics.
leads,
So
so
when you're,
forth.
yeah, so bleeds and leads. What's the one I use in Mexico? Boobs and blood above the fold.
That's from Mexico?
Yeah.
They got a lot of them, a lot of blood anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, so what proves my point is that who was it that elected Trump? Your liberal media, by giving Trump, I mean, he dominated the race because of what he did every day for the year and a half up. Nobody could get the airtime. So
I think
if
there's
he's
some truth
against
in what
it,
you're
if
saying,
he's-
yeah.
if the media is against them, if there was a collusion against Trump, they would have just got together. I mean, the mass media would have said, no coverage. All I had to do is not cover him, and he would be back in New York selling apartments.
I don't think they ever thought that by giving him the coverage they gave him, and it was huge. I mean, somebody put a number on it. You know, if he had to buy that advertising, it was way up
Impossible.
in the billions. And yeah, I think they did. They never, ever expected that he would win. And most of the coverage they gave him was kind of like, look what he said this time. Do you believe what he said about Cruz and about
Well, they were
Marco
covering his
Rubio
rallies.
and about
Yeah,
the rest
well,
of
that's
them
what he
during the
did.
primaries?
But that's what he
and
did. When you
it
say
is what
what,
he did.
I mean, you
No
say, well, you
doubt.
did. You're saying like, oh, they selectively covered that. But that's what he was. That's why he was so he was a
And
sensational
he was
candidate,
sensational. That's
and he's a
right.
sensational president, which is why they cover all this stuff. So it's
Yes.
it's a funny paradigm. You say, well, all they do is cover the negative stuff. Well, all the stupid stuff. Well, he's saying stupid stuff every day.
I watched the media cover George W. Bush after 2003 when he invaded Iraq. Overwhelmingly negative. I mean, it switched so much. I mean, he did win. He did beat Kerry, or Kerry beat himself, I should say, by his stuff they pulled up about his past, and Jerome Corsi, and so forth. But after that, Bush's second term was overwhelmingly negative press on him. And then Obama,
Well, we had a little
it flipped.
trouble in that second term. It's called the Iraq War.
I referred to that.
Yeah,
They
okay.
did go after him, the Iraq War, on the Iraq War, but it wasn't enough for him to, he still went on to beat Kerry, is what I meant to say. But then it was the debacle with the the recession that we had, which, he owned some of that. But then Obama, they were adoring of him for the entire 8 years, and I believe played down stuff. I mean, they were very careful not to report negatively on him, except for AM radio, except for what Fox News as it became more stronger. and internet stuff.
I mean, and I know
And
this
now,
is going to be
now
one
here
of
we
those-
are again to Trump and flipping exactly
But
the
it's
other
a-
way.
it's an
So
endless-
looking at it over time, I've seen profound differences in coverage. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the counter to that is that, again, media goes after the news. They did not give Bill Clinton a free pass and Monica Lewinsky. They
No,
did
they
not.
didn't.
He was every day.
That's true.
It's sensational news there. Trump
Right.
sensational there. Trump now, he's got the porn star. I mean, you can't. There's more stuff to talk about that's more interesting. Obama happened to be incredibly squeaky clean. He had a couple of kids. I mean, a nice wife. I mean,
In his personal life, he was, yes.
What did they have? What did they have to go? I remember Fox going after he went to church with Reverend Wright back in in Chicago or something. I mean, a firebrand reverend in Chicago, or wherever he was, and that's a terrible thing. And that was a story on Fox for months and months and months and months and months.
Right.
Look at the associates that Trump has now with Russia and China and all the stuff that's going on. So it's just to me, it's no. And maybe Obama, and I know you can bring up things that I don't even hear of the things he committed, but I also know the difference between a mouse and an elephant, and the stuff that what's going on now just pales.
I think we saw the power of media, of left-wing media, when I was really waiting for that OIG report to come out on the Hillary investigation. I couldn't wait for
I
that
know,
to
Bill. We couldn't get through 40 minutes without a Hillary reference.
Where I really wanted to see that come out. I was anxious
Yeah.
to watch the hearings and so forth when it did. Media, that day is when what we saw, media was completely dominated, and Democrats were completely dominated by little kids on the border, Papa, Papa, little pictures of moving pictures and still photographs of this issue. The power of media to completely change the debate was demonstrated to me. And this was something that had gone on for a long time under Obama but they focused on that. There was one change. I mean, Sessions did say, okay, now we're going to enforce this to the letter
Zero
of the law.
tolerance.
Yeah, so there was a policy change about actual enforcement, zero tolerance. But then that was incredible. Then Trump showed me something that I don't know if he, like when you were referring earlier to, his sensation, the media coverage that he got, and it helped him to win the presidency. I agree with that. He did. I didn't know how much did he steer it? How smart was he to see that and do it for his own benefit? I wasn't convinced of that. But when I saw how he handled this huge, firestorm of media, just a couple of weeks ago this was, and turned it around by, okay, no, we're not going to separate families anymore. We're going to ship them all back together, or we're going to,
They aren't shipped together, though, right? They still can't find them.
I'm not sure how it's being
they're up in New
handled on
York
the
and
board.
all over
We had
the
to wait
place.
for a federal judge who had ruled that there's a 20-day waiting period, and then I'm not sure how that was adjudicated, and it hasn't been 20 days yet. I'm not sure how that's the nuts and bolts of it. But what I'm looking at is the big picture. He diffused it with one ruling, and he made a statement that was covered widely. I don't like to back off. I don't like to give in, but I'm going to do this. He completely changed it around, and then he went on a roll, and now it's amazing. Now I'm thinking he is savvier than I would have expected. Stupid about some of the things he says and tweets still, and it has been right along, but savvy enough to know how to manipulate the media in spite of itself.
Yeah, I would say that, and I think that's always been a thing about Trump, does he really have a secret, is he smarter than he looks, basically?
Yeah, right.
And I have to admit, as time goes on, I believe less so. I think that the term everybody uses, that he's a transactional president, is that he does things off the cuff, like the zero tolerance, he gets burned, he pulls back. I mean, it's not like some big plan. Like, why would you bring that grief on oneself? I just think that's the way he operates. I mean, when he became on the scene with the whole Bertha thing with Obama. I mean, he pushed that for a couple of years back.
Bertha,
the
yeah.
Bertha. I don't think that would be smart politics. That's just what he bleed, so he just did it. And I think it was not to go back to the election, but it was a perfect storm of events, and his type of personality and all that. And as I say, it was like Hillary missed the, right at the jumper. I mean, right at the end of the basketball game, when the guy misses the jumper with 1 second to go to win the game, Comey comes out with the letter, and that was the missed jumper, and not that she didn't deserve to be in that position. I mean, she screwed up all the way along to be in the position to lose the game, but that was the end of the perfect storm. So I really don't think he's that smart. And I think, and his idea, I mean, and what I always say, not in defense of Trump, but just sort of my perspective on it is that all the stuff, I mean, the economy is so good. We're always driven by the economy, and I don't believe that presidents have that much control of it. I don't blame George Bush for the mortgage crisis. I don't give Obama that much credit. I mean, we've had coming out of recession for 8 or 9 years now. We were so low, we only had one place to go up, and you can debate about whether he saved the auto industry. But basically, you go up, you go down. And we're going to have a recession in 2 or 3 years, no matter who's a president. But, but with Trump, because we've had this good economy, I think, because we're always driven by the economy, elections generally are, is that so a lot, but nothing's really happened yet. Like he goes to North Korea, and the two sides of it is that, the North Korean leaders have been trying, Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather, they've been trying to get summits with presidents for 40 years. And so he does it, and he gives up Trump gives up the military exercises, and now there's more trade between North Korea and China. Well, how did that work out? I guess, we don't know yet. We don't know. Now he's going to meet with Putin again. Is he going to legitimize the Crimean invasion? We don't know that. I mean, he's obviously...
He has made noises in that direction.
Yeah, and he's, he's praising the dictators, he's trashing our allies, but nothing's really happened yet. Go ahead.
He's given us a cue.
What's the cue?
Cue to number
He's
2.
tired of hearing me yak about Trump.
Well, I rely on him for timing, because when he puts up the 5 at
What time?
55 minutes.
How much time do we have left?
Gosh, I don't know.
Should have a clock.
We started pretty close. I got 10 minutes of 11, so
15.
about 15
All right.
minutes. Okay. All right. Tuesday, Senate Intelligence Committee said that the intelligence community properly concluded in January of last year that Russian President Vladimir Putin was trying to help Donald Trump when Moscow meddled in the 2016 election. This conclusion has been affirmed by Trump's entire national security team, but refuted by President Trump. Do you believe the Intelligence Committee's conclusion? And if so, do you believe Russia's meddling affected the results of the presidential election? That's a long question.
It is a long question.
Do you want me to tackle it, or you want?
I mean, I can be very quick. I think absolutely yes, they did, and how much they did and how it affected, we don't know. But we know that and certainly with Facebook and the bots. I mean, how it's sort of like in my world of saying, hey, you want to buy 300,000 impressions on the Conway Daily Sun website, how much business is that going to get you? Well, we'd like to think it does because it's exposure, but sometimes we just can't prove it.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Right. As to did it have affected the results of the presidential election, I think no, it did not. They spent, I don't know where these figures come from, but I've seen it more than once, $100,000, $200,000.
Who?
The Russians on Facebook and trying to, I didn't even understand the
Is that a
bots
lot or
thing.
little?
I would call that very little.
Yeah,
when you consider. Yeah,
I mean, I think they did a very good job. There were lots and lots of websites spreading anti-Hillary stories, and her being sick, and they did an incredible job at it. What disturbs me more is that Trump's not doing it. He's not recognizing it, and he's not doing anything about it. I mean, this is a little bit of it's war, and if it would have another
war between us and Russia.
Yeah, I mean, it's war against Russia. I mean, their plan is to disrupt NATO. Their plan is to disrupt our elections. They happen to be in favor of Trump this time because he was more of a disruptive candidate, and they didn't like Hillary. But I think it's a dangerous thing, and I think that, I'm not saying it's the threat. We have lots of threats. They have nuclear weapons, but the fact that Trump is allowing, when Putin denies it, he agrees with him. Putin does. When Putin says we didn't do it, Trump basically takes him at his word. That's
he
the
repeats
trouble.
what Trump says. Yeah, what Putin says.
So that's I think it's troubling. I mean, do we Do I know any specifics? No, but it's a troubling factor to me.
The United States, for my entire childhood, I remember my father worked for the Department of Defense. He was a procurement officer and negotiated contracts and so forth between the federal government and aerospace and defense contracts. And Radio Free Europe was big, and didn't AID, Agency for International Development, was kind of cover for a lot of other propaganda exercises on. And didn't you tell me Adam worked for them at one point?
Go ahead.
That was propaganda aimed at influencing Russian politics, the Russian government. And we spent a lot of money, I don't know how many, but well into the hundreds of millions, I would think, over time. Is that any different, just using the technology of the day, than what Russia, spent a couple $100,000 trying to do with Facebook in 2016?
Well, it's by degree, and I agree. I mean, we did, my partner, Adam Hershan, worked for Voice of America, and they were on disinformation campaigns, and that was the technology of the day. You'd spread over the airwaves, and in fact, I did, when I was lived in Washington 30 years ago, when I first got there, I did, before I became an international famous photographer that I was referencing you. No, I tried, didn't. Then I wrote some freelance stuff for them, for Voice of America, and they were stories about America. I mean,
is that where you met him?
No,
Adam?
that's another story.
Okay.
But those are just good stories about America, and that was part of disinformation. So I would just argue, it's to say, well, it's no different now. It's kind of like saying, there's no difference between the. We grew up with newspapers and TV and radio, and media's no different now. Well, no, it is a lot different. Like you can say, the social media and the digital revolution has changed a lot of things, and not just
definitely
media.
has.
So I think that's the degree. I mean, what Russia has done has been really more effective. I mean, it's been more effective, and I think whether Russians doing it or just a general, what you would say, fake news or disinformation on both parts. The internet has allowed that.
I believe fake news. I remember reading the first time I heard about fake news. It was originated in Merrimack College, Andover, Massachusetts, and I used to drive by that almost every day. It wasn't far from where I grew up, and there was an instructor there had come up with a list of what she called fake news sites, and Facebook agreed to take her analysis for what she had and refused to give space or access to that Facebook platform to the news outlets, all of whom were right-wing conservative news outlets like Breitbart and a few others. I can look it up. And this was a campaign to say, we're not going to allow this fake news that comes from the right-hand side of the spectrum anymore. Trump took that and he flipped it around, and then it became his term, and he applied it to the left side highly effectively, which, and I look at it, but very few people know that that's how it originated, the term. And it's, is there fake news in the media? Well, ask Brian Ross. He just lost his job, I think it was yesterday. ABC News. How many times did he come out with things, look and say, well, this theater mass shooting in Colorado, and he said, oh, it was a Tea Party person, and it turned out to be wrong. And a couple of three other, major stupid things that he
got fired?
Well, he resigned.
From ABC?
I think he allowed him to resign with dignity.
That shows the integrity of mainstream media.
Well,
but I think maybe we talked about this last time when we did it off camera, but as a media person, we are so restricted in terms of how we accept political ads. We have to file our rates.
Yeah, I remember you said so. Yeah, you did.
So it's highly regulated. We can't put in a help wanted ad. We can't. Not help wanted, but a for rent ad. We can't put in adults only. The housing department. We've gotten in trouble over that years and years ago before we learned. We just can't do that.
Or you can't even say quiet.
You can't say, well, I don't know about that. That's a good one. But certainly the kids, mature adults, that kind of stuff, you can't do it. And so it's amazing to us in the inside media to think, never mind the fake news part, but just that it's a total Wild West, with digital. And I think Facebook, things are happening, and over the next few years, where they're going to be more accountable in terms of identifying if you're putting up a site that's advocating one side or another. You got to identify yourself. You know, I mean, it kind of flies in the face of Citizens United decision. You know, with all the corporate money that's kind of, one would say, corrupted our system a little bit, but you know, I think it's coming. I think the reform is coming in digital. So I wanted to ask you. I did want to ask you one thing, and so you know, we know that Bernie Sanders and Trump are really the two sides of the same coin, and in the sense that who they had influence in. So to me, I think the biggest thing with the election of the young woman in Brooklyn or the Bronx, wherever that was, you know, the 28-year-old woman who Ocasio-Cortez, who unseated, was it Crowley? Mm-hmm. Crowley, 10-term veteran. So we had a congressional candidate, and we have them all in our first district here. There's like 8 Democrats, 3 or 4 Republicans. This guy Terrence O'Rourke, he's a Rochester attorney, but he was a Bronze Star. He's a Democrat, Bronze Star. He's got his military chops. He's like the perfect Democrat candidate. So it was this chatting with him, you know. I said, to me, it's this have-not situation. You know, that's the problem. Like the Trump, in general terms, Trump has appealed to the rural have-nots. And in general terms, like a big part of that population. And then the real left radical liberals appeal to the more urban have-nots. And so I said that to him, just generally speaking, you know, I mean, if you go into any urban areas. So he said, this guy Terrence says, you know, I got a brother who lives in Philadelphia, and he said, you know, he says he and I were talking about that same thing, and he says, boy, if the poor in Philadelphia ever got together with the poor in Western Pennsylvania, watch out, you know. And so what do you think about that concept? Like, I think we have to start worrying about, in addition to our regular politics, is that, you know, like 50% of the people have no more than, in this country, have no more than $800 at hand.
That's a scary statistic.
You know, something like that. It's amazing. And so this have-not thing, and I think that's the appeal, right, of both sides. If you're not part of the big system.
I think there's an overlap, yeah, between Sanders supporters and Trump supporters, yes. Yeah. And also anti-corporate and taking jobs out of America into Europe and Asia mostly, and Latin America. But trade deals like NAFTA and GATT and that Pacific one, I
TIP.
forget.
The TIP, was that what it was? I mean, the one that Trump allowed?
Yeah. That's what they had in common. That's what they beat that drum, and I think they gained support from, you know, Bernie supporters, people who went for him. Trump gained support from them. Yes, and they go at it from somewhat different angles, but mostly the same. That they're not American. I mean, Sanders doesn't use the patriotic angle to it. But you know, Trump added that to it, made it more powerful, I think. But yeah, they did. Is it haves and have-nots? I would say that the liberal on the coasts, you know, they called it flyover country. They're out of touch. We are more polarized, I think, and that polarization is increasing at a rapid rate. But I would say have-nots it's a coalition on liberal side that is. Wealthy people are not all Republican anymore, or not even mostly, I don't think, anymore. I mean, there are wealthy donors and on the Democrat side, and mostly the liberal elite do well, but they have as mascots kind of the, you know, welfare people and minorities. So that's the coalition that.
I think there's a dishonesty. I think there's a, you know, and I guess the have-nots maybe too extreme to say, but it seems like they use that. I think there's dishonesty on the Trump side by saying we're going to bring back coal. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, I mean, there's only like 50,000 coal miners in the country, and there used to be 1 million back in 1910, and it's just technology is what did it. I mean, so there are a lot of things, and I think there's and you would say has been dishonesty that appealed, but that was the emotional part. Bring back coal, bring back to those things, which were fundamentally dishonest statements in my view. And the same thing is happening to Democrats: free this, free that, free college. It's dishonest, but it's appealing to people who, on both sides, who feel left out. I guess
Okay,
that's how
I see what you mean. Ocasio-Cortez, I think, appealed to that constituency.
Yeah.
But interesting, even though the Sanders organization recruited her to run, which didn't expect that she'd win, but they recruited her to run. She worked for Sanders. She worked for Ted Kennedy way back. She is now to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And then Tom Perez yesterday, who was DNC chairman, said she's the future of the Democrat Party. Now, that surprised me that he would say that, because Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and other remaining leadership are playing that down, saying, no, that was one isolated district, and so forth. Well, they see disaster for the midterms, but especially 2020, if people like Ocasio-Cortez do become the future of the party. They're looking at another 1972 with McGovern. And I think they're right about that, and wise to try and hold it back. But I think Ocasio-Cortez was just open about what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer also believe, but are too savvy to come out and say so. That we also believe in a Democrat socialist platform. And look at the success that Bernie had. I mean, he wasn't even a Democrat officially. He's supposedly an independent. But that's the direction the Democrat Party is going in, is to socialism. And I know you you think there's a clear distinction between socialism and communism. People on my side would look at that as a slippery slope, and you're heading toward that direction. I mean, who was it? This guy in the Washington Times that's on Bret Baier's panel most every night. I forget his name, Charlie something. He came out and called it. She's a communist. So, and the rest of the people on the panel laughed. But he is pretty blunt.
Those Danish and those Swedes, those communists.
Interesting.
You see what's happening in Denmark though with the education centers they're setting up. They're forcing, with the immigrant ghettos, right? And so now, it's like 15% of the country in Denmark are Muslim. And so and I don't know, I can't give you exactly how it works, but they're taking kids away. They got these programs where they're taking like 2-year-olds or 1-year-olds away from the immigrants' families to go to the centers to educate them for 4 or 5 hours a day to learn the Danish values.
I did not see that. That's interesting.
Right up your alley. I mean, it's part of the whole backlash against the immigrant crisis.
I knew that Denmark was, in the Scandinavian countries, was moving away from it, openly, whereas Sweden and Norway, they're having massive problems, and they continue to deny it, but they're not going to be able to deny it any longer, and they're going to have to. All of Europe is dealing with this, and they're gone. I'd say they're gone. Europe they're not going to stop it.
Well,
we'll see.
It's a mess. Bill Marvel. If Bill Marvel was here, he would say it all started. I would say a lot of it started with the Iraq War.
1 minute.
Bill Marvel would say it all started about 200 years ago when our population got to be like 2 billion or 3 billion. It's just too many people.
Yeah, he just wrote about that. Yeah, well, we all come from different directions, don't we?
Well, happy 4th of July.
Thank you. It was, again, I got to about 5% of the things I had prepared, but yeah, it was fun. And are you willing to come back in another month?
Yes.
Yeah, August. Okay.
It'll be the next July 4th. No,
next July 4th.
No, and you let me know. Just give me a little advance.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll do that. And it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, Tom.
All right.